and welcome. My name is Peter and this is the Esoteric Order of Gamers. Now, occasionally I get an email from a company asking me to review their game. And I don't always say yes because I've got limited time and I can't review everything. And also there's a lot of games out there that I'm not particularly personally interested in. However, I did get one from Crowd Games. I think it's Crowd Games. It's actually written Crow with a big D at the end. But anyway, and they wanted me to review their game Bestiary of Sigillum. This is the collector's edition. The game first came out in 2014, but last year they had a Game Found campaign and released this collector's edition. So I said, yeah, send me a copy. That looks interesting. It's a tactical combat kind of game. There's no luck in it. It's very much tactics. Well, let me tell you all about it. So here we are all set up for a two-player game of Bestiary of Sigillum. Now, I'm assuming it's pronounced that way. It could be pronounced Sigillum or... Anyway, pronounce it any way you like. It's mainly a two-player game, but you can play with 4 players as a team game. In other words, 2 players on a side. Now, Bestiary of Sigillum is basically a tactical combat game. And you have 3 of these characters each. And basically you're playing on this small board. And in the deluxe set, you have quite a good choice of different boards. These are double-sided as well. And it's a very limited sort of play area, divided into hexes. And you also have what is called the Sigil of Time, which is basically a cooldown mechanic for your abilities. I'll show you how that works in a moment. Each of you chooses a castle on opposite sides of the board. You choose your characters. There are various ways of doing this. And you take a character token, like so. And you also take special tokens for your abilities on your sheet. And you get some vitality tokens to keep track of your health. Now, one thing that this deluxe set has, which is quite lovely, is this tray. And you can put the counters for each of your characters in the little wells in this lovely plastic tray. And they're all numbered, and the numbers are on the character sheet. So it's very easy to get the counters. Really nice design, this. You can see Mortem here is number 16. So I just go to 16 in the tray and take out his counters, and I'm done. And that saves a lot of time going through Ziploc bags and all that kind of thing. The other thing we've got is a number of effect tokens. And again, these come in a nice tray. There isn't exactly the right number of wells for the amount of counters, but they go in there rather nicely anyway, and it's going to make it a lot easier to find your effect counters during the game. And while we're here, we've got positive effects, negative effects, and then some neutral ones as well. Now, the gameplay is really very straightforward, and really the tactics come in how you use the different special abilities of your characters and how you plan when to play those special abilities, because you have, as I mentioned, a cooldown period. So when you play an ability, it's going to be a little while before you can use it again, depending on the ability itself. So there's a lot of strategy and tactics there. There's no random element whatsoever, no dice in this game. And the fact that it is this kind of chess-like match is really reinforced by the fact that they have scenarios in some of the books, which are basically puzzles. They're like chess puzzles. In other words, do something by a certain number of turns, optimize your play to achieve this goal, that kind of thing. Anyway, we'll get onto that later. What you do is you have your castle piece set up here, and the idea is that you want to get your opponent's castle all the way to the end of his track and their castle ruined, and then you win the game. The turn sequence is pretty straightforward. You have one player who is the timekeeper, and they stay the timekeeper for the whole of the game. They're the first player in the first round. There are 3 phases to the game: a time phase, an ability phase, and a control phase. At the beginning of each round, the timekeeper rotates the Sigil of Time spinner 1 space clockwise on the board. And by the way, what I've done with this board, because it's got a piece in the middle that keeps the spinner working, and that can make the board kind of sit not very flat on a surface, I took a little bit of foam and put a hole in the middle, just like that. And that makes this sit really comfortably on the table, and it doesn't shift around. So you might want to do that if you've got this. So anyway, the timekeeper moves the Sigil of Time clockwise around the board. Then we move on to the first player's time phase. They remove any ability tokens that are in spaces corresponding to where the pointer is now pointing, And they also remove any positive effect tokens that are affecting their own characters and any negative effect tokens that they placed on their opponent's characters. Then we move on to the meat of the game, which is the ability phase. And during this phase, you get to use the abilities of your characters. Now, each character has 3 abilities. One is a core ability, which has a movement and an attack component, and the others are support abilities that do other things. Core abilities don't have a cooldown period. You can use them every round. What you do is you decide whether you want to use the maneuver ability, in which case you move it to the left on your sheet, or the attack ability, in which case you move the little counter to the right. Now, if your character token isn't on the board yet, it immediately moves onto your castle hex. Then if you did a maneuver, it could move 1 adjacent space on the board here. If you decided instead to do an attack, the attacks are different depending on the character. They have a range and they do a certain amount of damage. We'll get onto combat in just a moment. So you can either maneuver or attack. That's your basic core ability. However, you also have these support abilities, which are specific to the character. So my vampire Mortem here has a vampiric drain, with which he can target himself or any ally in an adjacent hex, and they are targeted with the special ability Vampirism. There's also a cooldown period noted in the description. In this case, it's 5 minus 1 per wound on Mortem. So say he doesn't have any wounds, that means in this case it's a 5 cooldown period, so he puts the ability token on the 5 space of the Sigil of Time. So it's important, as you can see, to time when you use your support abilities, because you're going to have to wait until the Sigil of Time turns round. Now, the Sigil of Time only turns once per round. So the timekeeper turns it as the first player, but the second player doesn't get to turn it. Combat is very straightforward and all described on the sheets themselves. You do a number of attack points, you subtract any defense points that the character has, and that's how many injuries you do. And you just flip over the vitality tokens on the character sheet to indicate this. After you've played with all of your characters, you move on to your control phase, and this is where your tower does damage to the opponent's tower, and it's how you win the game, because remember, we're trying to destroy the opponent's tower. For each tower under your control, you do 1 point of damage to the opponent. Now, you control a tower if you have more control points in the 4 hexes surrounding a tower than your opponent has control points. Each character by default has 1 control point, but this can change due to special abilities. So you can see on this board there are 4 towers, so you're constantly jockeying for control of those towers because they're the things that are going to do the damage which is going to let you win the game. Once the first player has moved or attacked or used their special abilities, play goes to the second player, and they do the same with their characters. Now, the terrain on the board doesn't make any difference to movement or anything like that, but it can affect special abilities. So in the middle of the game, we may have all our characters out in the board in various places, like so. These are out on the board. Various ability tokens are out on the Sigil of Time that have been used. And as the Sigil of Time moves around, players are going to get back their special abilities so they can use them again. They're going to have effect tokens on different characters when the special abilities put them on there. So there's a whole lot happening, but it's very easy to access all of this information because it's right in front of you on your character sheets. So you can easily see it's a very tactical little game, and it's very important to get your pieces in the right position to control towers and to use your special abilities at the right time and everything like that. It's not a complex game, as you can see, very straightforward rules, but there's a lot of room there for tactical play when you get to know the special abilities of your own characters and, of course, your opponent characters. Now, because we've got a big bunch of characters here, check them all out. This can be a little bit tricky because, of course, it's hard to memorize what's going on with all these different characters. So I recommend before you start the game, after you've chosen your characters, that you have a good read of your characters and make sure you memorize what your opponent's characters can do as well, because that will stand you in good stead for the game. This deluxe edition also comes with some lovely extras. We've got some special boards here, so we've got a lot of variety in boards, and some of these have special rules to go with them. There's also some optional event cards if you want to add that to the game. And when you use these event cards, you actually have one in play and you also have the next one revealed, so you know what the next event is going to be, so you can plan for it. And you've also got a number of campaign books. So if you want to play these campaigns, this will keep you busy forever. Now, as I said, these games are sort of like puzzles. So if you're into that kind of working out the logic of how you win in a particular way and do particular things in a particular time, etc. You're going to love that kind of thing. I'm not a big fan of puzzles, but we'll get into that later. Okay, that's it for the game mechanics. Pretty straightforward. So let's get on to what I think of Bestiary of Sigillum and my thoughts on the game. So, Bestiary of Sigillum. Well, this is a game that does one thing very well, and that one thing is tactical battles between teams of different creatures with special abilities. It's chess-like, there's no random element, and really the special abilities that each character has are quite limited. They do one style of thing, and they do that one style of thing well, and so you have very much an idea of what your pieces do and how they're going to react against your opponent's pieces and the combinations of the two. And that's, of course, where the tactics and strategy comes in. Now, do I personally like this game? I do like it, but it's not for me. And the reason is that it's very puzzle-like. And if you love chess, you're going to love this kind of game. If you want chess with a fantasy feel overlaid onto it, if you like the idea of doing that solo campaign or the series of solo campaigns where you're solving out chess-like problems with these different characters, you're going to absolutely love Bestiary of Sigillum because it does that very well. When I played it with my opponent, they really liked it and they liked the idea of doing those chess-like problems and playing it more. But for me, it fell flat. And the reason is, I've said this before, I'm not a big fan of puzzles. I don't like sort of working out problems. I prefer something with a bit of random chaos, with big moments of, oh, I rolled a bad dice, or oh, I won, or something like that. It doesn't have to have dice in it, but I do like those sort of ups and downs and those random elements. This is very much more thinky than that. You can play it on a very light level, of course, but it's going to be much more satisfying if you really know the capabilities of the units and your opponent's units, and you really think out those problems. Especially because the boards are so small. I mean, there's a very limited amount of maneuvering there, so every move is very, very important. It's particularly good if you can get an opportunity to move and attack. If you're just doing the move, you're leaving yourself open to your opponent's attacks, all that kind of thing. You're constantly thinking of what the other player can do and what you can do and how you can get control of those different catapult towers so you can do damage to your opponent. Now that may make it sound a little bit dry, but it really isn't, because you can throw in lots of variety. And of course the variety comes from the huge number of different characters, very generous with the different characters. And also in this collector's edition, you've got a whole range of different boards as well. And they can throw in things like lava spaces. So if you stop on a lava space, you get a hit done to you at the end of your activation. And, different types of terrain that do different things. There's also the Bastion special abilities. So you can choose a special card for your own castle, and that gives it 3 special abilities, just like characters, but you only get the first one to start with, and the others activate as more damage is done to your castle. So that throws in a lot of variety as well. And I think, for me personally, that made it a little bit more interesting to add those kind of wrinkles to the gameplay. Now, obviously, a lot of effort has gone into this game. It's originally made in 2014, so it's been around for a while, and the designer has put a lot of effort into making this edition really nice. There are a few little production problems. On the whole, it's really nicely produced. The only thing is that with these trays, they're a little bit tight. So when you're placing the counters into this tray, for example, the special ability counters you might want to put upside down, and it's just that tiny little bit that makes the difference, because a counter, as you know, is sort of round on the top and is a little bit wider on the bottom elevation, so they fit just a little bit better. Similarly with the other effect tokens, they just don't quite fit, and that is of course when you make these plastic injection molds, they tend to widen a bit. So on paper, it would probably look like a perfect fit, but when they're actually made, they're a little bit wider. So they do all actually fit in the trays, and the trays are great, but they just could have been a little bit looser. Very tiny criticism there. But on the whole, I love particularly this tray. It makes setup and pack down really easy because of the numbers. You can just grab your tokens and put them in the space. This is a really good design decision. This board itself and the mat boards are all nicely designed. The only thing, as I said, because it's got the nubbin on the bottom for the spinner, that it may rock a little on the table, and I came up with this little bit of foam. Maybe a solution for that could have been a double thickness board with a hole in it, so it sat flat, but again, a small criticism. Everything else is really nicely done. The artwork is definitely a matter of taste. It looks just a little bit less professional than everything else. It's a certain style choice. I understand why they went with it, but for me it's just a little bit underwhelming, and also because it's all monochrome, it can be a little bit difficult to immediately tell the difference between your character tokens on the board. I think a bit more distinctive artwork and in color would have been able to see that a little bit easier, but it's a style choice. By the same token, the ability tokens have the same style of artwork, and they're a little bit difficult to distinguish from a distance. However, the backs of these are really nice. You never see them, but there's a nice blurb on the background and they look like books. It's a really lovely job. Again, if you want to add a little bit of randomness, and this is the only random element that I can think of, you can add these event cards, which make it a little bit more interesting. The good thing is that the event card comes out and you can see what is coming up, so you can plan for it. So what they've done is mitigate the randomness of the event cards by allowing you to see them around in advance and allowing you to plan for them. And there's some extra counters in here for things like, terraforming ability, so you can change the terrain on different spaces if you've got that particular ability. And yeah, so it's really nicely done. I think it's beautifully produced. I really like these little plastic castles. I like the fact that it's not miniatures. I think miniatures would have been overkill. These little things raise up your character tokens nicely on the board. Again, if the character tokens had been a little bit more colourful and distinctive, I think they would have looked nicer in these. But again, that's a personal choice. It's a nice production. I really like the maps. They're very clear and nicely made. The artwork on those is excellent. In fact, if the character art had been in the same style as that, I would have been really happy. So I think if you're watching this review, you're thinking, that's the game for me, or that isn't the game for me. It isn't the game for me because I'm not a puzzle fan. My friend played it and thought, yeah, this is great. And there's a lot of opportunity for trying out all the different combinations of characters and having different teams. Also, team play is possible as well. You can have 2 characters per player per side, 2 players on each side. So there's a lot here in the box. And if you're looking for a tactical battler, I think this is a really good choice. Oh, there's a box fart there. I've got a few other games like this. I'm thinking of Super Fantasy Brawl. Is also just characters fighting each other on a field, but that has a much larger hex field. It's got the random element of cards. It's a bit more madness, and personally I like that madness a little bit more. But I think, again, if you like chess, if you like fantasy, and you want to put the two together, I think this is the game for you. So there you go, Bestiary of Sigillum. Definitely a matter of taste, but nicely produced. And for what it's setting out to do, it does very well indeed. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. This is Peter from the Esoteric Order of Gamers. Please go along to the website at orderofgamers.com. I've done a rules and reference for this game. Of course, I do it for all my games, and you can download that. I think you'll find it very, very useful. Print it out, laminate it, stick it in the box, and it'll make learning and playing your games a lot faster. And while you're there, you might want to make a donation if you find it useful, or join up to the Patreon channel and support all my work. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.